When I heard that you were in the documentary, and of course I watched it, then I started hearing what it was all about. I thought it was just complete and utter bullshit, basically. I know you like the word clean, Roy, but let me just say this. First of all, I'm an interviewer, and I do in-depth interview, watching people like yourself and Bob, and it's really hard to do a good interview, and it's hard to keep these guys, particularly athletes, to be into it. Because otherwise, they're going to be, But they want to tell their stories. If you do your research and you really give them an opportunity, listen to them. Instead of an hour, they'll stay 2 hours because if they think it's worth it, they will.
Definitely, right. I think
because I try to figure that out.
I think,
from watching you guys.
I believe. Well, thank you. I believe people want to be understood. It's not sometimes possible because there's too much complication in one's life, and there's another element that says, some people say it's no one's business. I don't really care what they think. But I think deep down, people have a desire to be understood. And I think at the very basic level, my show was generally speaking a show where people got to be better understood. Right. Like my greatest compliment would be when someone would say, "Boy, I never knew that about that guy. I thought I didn't like him or her.
Right. And
I saw your show, and I liked them."
And you gave them a fair shot to talk about.
Yeah, talk about their life, talk about who they are, talk about misconceptions, and talk also about what they would do differently too, how they would have looked, how would they have approached life differently if this thing didn't happen, whatever it might have been.
Right.
So my show was really about having most of the athletes being understood. And let me also say this, that I don't even mind second guessing. I don't mind critics as long as they understand the context. What's happening now is people just have this hot button and they judge things, whatever they might be. I do it myself sometimes. I find myself doing it too sometimes because I'm thinking in terms of soundbite or synopsis in 2-3 lines, because I have a Facebook page too and I have Twitter. I'm not a big social media guy, but I think life is about nuance. Life is about, it's not black or white. Most things in life are gray, and there's other colors too. And people sometimes have bad days, or people have regrets. People make horrible mistakes. However, my show was an opportunity for people to talk about it. I don't think you see it much anymore. You have judgment of it, but you don't really see it in context anymore, as much anyway, certainly.
All right. We'll start getting into that whole current controversy. But for people to look at that little piece in that documentary and start saying all these things, I even have some of the quotes, I thought it was absolutely disgraceful because you interviewed guys like Pete Rose. You asked them tough questions. And it wasn't no ambushing him at the All-Star game or something like that. You asked him about the gambling questions, and of course, and I interviewed Pete too, and he gave his answers. And what more can you do? Tell him, "Oh no, I think you're not telling the truth." That's the answer he gave at the time. You got to take it.
Well, I mean, one of the things I said in the midst of this controversy is, if you ask somebody the question, they deny it. Where do you go with that? Unless you have an affidavit.
Unless you know better.
Well, unless you have a court affidavit or you have some kind of evidence or fingerprints, metaphorically or literally fingerprints that deny what he just said or she.
Right.
You're calling somebody a liar, and it's just his word against you. I mean, I never have been a criminal investigator here. This is not a Senate subcommittee hearing. It's an interview. And while I'm very proud of the work that I've done for a long, long time, continue to be proud of it, and I have a lot of diversity, I have humor, I have as much humor in my show as anything else.
Right, absolutely.
I do think that once you ask somebody a question, and if they come up with their answer, you have to accept it. Unless you want to challenge them again, you have some information to the contrary. And sometimes we didn't have that. In the case that we're talking about, I didn't have that. So once somebody makes a statement, there's not really much any more of a direction you can go.
But I just could not understand why people are saying Firestone comes off as a fawning fan instead of a tough questionnaire. I mean,
the fawning fan is a reflection of the time. He was an America's sports hero. He was the biggest sports hero probably of the 70s and 80s, or right there with Ali. He was beloved. It was like interviewing Bill Cosby in 1989. Fawning, I called him juice.
Big deal. I mean,
I know a lot of people called him juice.
Right.
In the case of the fawning part, was it chummy? Sure, it was chummy. That was part of my style. There was a warmth to my interviewing.
Right.
There was an approach to people as comfortable in a comfortable interview. Again, I'm not here. This isn't Guantanamo here.
You know Max Kellerman, right?
Of course.
He played the audio before the part 2 aired. Max said, okay, people are giving Roy a way harder time. He was trying a technique, just so that he gets, because obviously OJ's getting really uncomfortable. The thing is, when I heard about this and I went back, I was driving, when I went back home, I started watching that interview and stuff too. The only thing I could do is put myself in your position, because this is kind of what I do also.
When you live your life so publicly and really almost with such ease, it's hard to believe that there could ever be any rocky times. The reason I'm bringing that to light now is not to dredge it up again, but more or less talk about how things can get distorted to such a point that you are portrayed as the bad guy. New Year's Eve, had a little bit too much to drink. There was some,
actually, my wife and I have been together for 12 years. And it really, when I look at it, it really wasn't that big of a fight. It's just that because of it being New Year's Eve,
right?
Because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, just finished a big party, it got a little loud.
But here's my point. The point I'm making, Juice, is that it got to such a point that you were portrayed in the press for a while. They're like a wife beater.
Well, and that bothered me. Obviously, it bothered my whole family. I mean, the day after this was over, we looked at each other and said, we had a fight. We were both guilty. No one was hurt. It was no big deal, and we got on with our life.
Look, these guys can walk anytime they want to. They go, okay, you know what? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to bring it up at all.
Right. Well, I brought it up late, as a matter of fact.
Right.
And not only did I bring it up at all, I'm the only one who brought it up in 1989.
Right.
Okay? I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back about it, but it is a fact. I'm the only one who talked about domestic violence, the only one who brought up an incident. By the way, in 1989, no one at ESPN said, oh, you were kind of fawning there, don't you think? Right? So let's remember that.
Right.
And this is more important than anything. That interview was still used entered as evidence by the prosecution. It was turned down, it was waived, but they entered it as evidence. So clearly they felt enough about that interview to want to put that in a crime investigation on a trial. And again, no one else asked him about it. Am I proud of the fact that it came off as too chummy? No, but it's mostly about the tone.
Just those couple of moments, though.
But it's the tone of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, Al Michaels could have been chummy with him. Bob Costas, who worked with him at NBC, and by the way, they worked him at NBC even after the incident. He was still hired. He worked at NBC. They could have interviewed him and talked about this incident. They didn't. And I'm not knocking NBC, but he had a pilot for a TV series right after the incident. So people weren't buying into any of this. They didn't believe it, and frankly, neither did I. I believed what he said was true, and once he said what he said, I have to accept it at face value. Now, a few weeks later, or maybe even a month later, it came out that there was a criminal investigation of the incident. He was also penalized or punished, quote unquote, with community service.
Right.
So the judge himself didn't even think it was that serious.
A pro-am golf tournament or something.
So even the judge himself, or whoever ruled on it, didn't think it important enough to give a more serious sentence. Listen, I have talked about this thing 1,000 times in the last 3 weeks. All I can tell you is I was a reflection of the time in doing that interview. The fawning part of it doesn't make me proud, but it wasn't really something to be ashamed of either in context at the time.
There was no fawning. I mean,
but
you just did what...
however people want to read it. But
if you watch it just a little bit, it might come up that way.
If you didn't know what was going to happen, and no one did, not ESPN, not the public, not me, certainly, that he was going to butcher 2 people 5 years later, when you ask those questions and he answers it matter-of-factly and almost jovially, well, if that's fawning, that's fawning. I mean, I knew the guy. I worked with the guy. I called him Juice. Other people called him Juice. The bottom line I'm trying to say is this. If you want to talk about real fawning, if you want to talk from a serious journalistic standpoint of those who really should be criticized for, quote, fawning and being too chummy, you got to point the finger at the LAPD. Now, I have a lot of respect for the police. Right. I've done a lot of things with the police. I've done fundraisers for them. It's a tough, thankless, heartbreaking job at times, and it takes a tremendous amount of pressure to be a cop. However, with multiple 911 calls from Nicole Simpson Brown, she begged them to come to the house and to talk to him. And they went to the house and more often than not asked for autographs.
Right.
And more often than not said, hey, Juice,
Yeah,
keep it on the down low, okay? We're still with you. You know what? That was their job. My job was to do an interview with a football player in context about what was going on at the time. Right. Their job was to get tough, and they didn't do it. So all I can say is I'm not sitting here in judgment even of the LAPD, but they bought into the whole myth of OJ too. So
because he had charm. Because even in your interview after that,
Totally.
before you knew it, he's charming OJ again.
Back again.
And even with Chris Myers, which I'm sure at that point, after the trial,
Chris interviewed him after the trial when he was found not guilty, but
Right.
there was a mound of evidence, confronted him with the evidence. He still denied it.
Well,
What are you going to do?
Right.
He still denied it. If someone doesn't want to answer truthfully, if someone wants to live in denial, you know, there was a joke David Letterman had in the middle of the trial. He says he was so good in the trial that he went to his attorneys and said, hey, maybe I didn't do it. You know, that was pretty funny.
Yeah. It was in the box thing,
It's
too.
pretty funny.
Yeah.
But the point of it is he was so good. He was a con man, and I was conned. Am I ashamed that I was conned by a con man? Maybe, but so was a lot of people. And so were a lot of people believing his myth like I did. So I am judged, and this is an important line too. There's a movie called A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson.
Right.
He looks at Tom Cruise and he says, you have the luxury of not knowing what I know. Okay, remember that line. The public, the viewing public, the judgmental public, the social media public has the luxury of knowing now what I couldn't have known then.
Right.
And they judge me for that? Come on.
Right.
Ridiculous.
Right.
And again, there's a lot of things that I'm uncomfortable with myself. But don't judge me because you know something that I didn't know.
Right.
It's not fair.
And we're talking about this like 20-some...
27 years later.
I mean...
Well, don't
yes.
think for a second that it hasn't hurt my stand. It's cost me some work. And I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it.
Did it cost you work from that, people?
Yeah. But it's also gotten me a lot of attention, too. I'm not happy with the way this thing
So
felt.
over the years, that has cost you work?
No, not over the years. Recently, last few weeks.
Okay, right.
The last couple of weeks. But I don't know that I know you're not asking for it, but people said, well, do you want to apologize? I said, apologize for what?
For what?
Now, do I have regret? Sure, I've had a lot of regret for a lot of years, well before this special came out, because I knew it would come to happen later. But I judge myself even in hindsight, and that's why I have the regret that if I had only known more, if I'd only had
There's
more...
nothing you could do.
There's nothing you can do.
There's nothing you can do.
But this is the perfect example of how the kangaroo court of social media works. They say the following: doesn't matter what the facts are, I'm giving you my opinion. Okay, but let's be fair about things. Give me some context. Give me some idea that you're going to judge me not just in hindsight, but judge me for the time. So the fawning interview portion, it was sort of my style. If you want to call it fawning, I called it friendly. I called it accessible. I wasn't going to just sit there and hit somebody over the head with a hammer. You're a liar and you're going to murder 2 people in 5 years from now.
Right.
You know, guess what? Nobody's going to do that.
But nobody even brought it up in
That's
an
right.
interview situation
That's
at the
right.
time. So you're certainly not going to take it to the next level.
And here's the other thing. A lot of these people...
I mean, you didn't know he's going to kill somebody in 2 years' time?
Right. It was 5 years, actually.
5 years? 5 years' time? God. Maybe he was going to become a good guy after...
Well, he acknowledged that something happened, even. I mean, he says, you know, we both were wrong, and we're going to go on with our lives, and I'm sorry it happened. We had too much to drink.
We got a little loud.
Yeah, got a little loud. The problem is that social media critics and, you know, hot button people on TV and radio, they're in the middle. They're in a grid of 15 subjects that they want to give their quick opinions on everything, and quickly dismiss or reject or criticize without really a lot of context and the whole of, you know. It's different when it's a win or a loss. A guy pitches lousy in a game or a guy misses a shot at the buzzer. You want to criticize, fine. But there is a lot of nuance in this story that demands that people judge me more fairly, and I was not. And here's the other thing. I had asked Ezra Edelman, who produced this wonderful special, it's a terrific job, that I would like to have an opportunity, even for a few seconds, to talk about what was going on at the time. That was not afforded me, and I feel that's unfair. And I feel because of it, when they place this thing on TV and all these people who are angry anyway, ready to ball up their fist, where are we going to strike out? Well, let's get the soft interviewer. Well, I wish.
Do you think it was his intention also to put it in
I
that way?
don't know.
I don't know if it was. I think it's just an example
I think
of.
he was trying to show the times.
Yeah.
But again, he interviewed 40 people for this interview. Do you think it would have been okay to have 41 for 30 seconds?
Yeah, and also a lot of those people were really hated for many, many years because they dropped the ball. A lot of them.
Right.
But now they get to tell their side.
But you see, I don't think that now that you look at this interview, and it definitely had an adverse reaction from a lot of people. There's no real fairness in this whole scheme of things with social media. And again, I'm the first one, way before any of these other people, to be critical of my work. I'm the toughest on my work of anybody that I know and ever will know. And that includes media critics. But I've seen people savage me without even making an attempt to understand what was going on. Just by the appearance of quote-unquote fawning, or whatever you want to call it, the appearance that I was soft on him.
I mean, the guy was probably on the show, agreed to be on the show because he was plugging his Hurt's appearance or whatever. You know
I
what
remember
mean?
what it was.
He didn't have to bring it up.
No, he
you
didn't.
Did.
Believe me, if he knew I was going to bring it up, he wouldn't have come on.
Right.
But there were no conditions.
And if you had gone on more, the guys upstairs would probably say, "Look, Roy, you better cool it down."
The whole conversation about domestic violence has changed dramatically in 20 years, and rightly so, and it's a good thing. But I likened it to interviewing Bill Cosby, say, in 1989, when Bill Cosby was the #1 star in the world, and let's say I would be jovial with Bill Cosby, talking about his golf game or whatever, and we know that, Bill, you've not always been a perfect person, but there were rumors that you might have had a relationship outside of your marriage. To a certain extent, that's no one's business at the time. Now it's everybody's business.
Yeah.
And especially in context with what happened with Bill Cosby.
Right.
But the thing I was comparing it to is like, let's say I grew up in 1787, and I had frilled Victorian shirts. And you looked at that frilled Victorian shirt in 2016, you go, look at that freaking outfit that he's wearing. Well, in a sense, my interviewing style was a reflection of that freaky outfit from 1787 in the sense that it was a different time and it was a different understanding about things like domestic violence.
Right.
And I'm embarrassed to the extent that the tone was viewed so soft in view of what would happen. He killed 2 people. But I'm not apologetic. There's nothing to really apologize
It's
for.
5 years before the Bronco chase. Come on.
Right.
Jesus
so
Christ. People will say stuff like, "Oh, thank you for owning up to it." I mean, owning up to
Owning up to what?
Yeah.
I
you wrote the
yeah, but I wasn't owning up. I was saying I had regret because of what happened.
Right.
But I'm not owning up to saying I was a terrible interviewer. I'm just saying I asked a couple of questions. It was not even in the whole of the interview. It was just a couple of towards the end of the show, because it was an article in the LA Times about 5 or 6 lines long that there was an incident on New Year's Eve, but there was no criminal investigation to our knowledge at the time at all. We knew the police were investigating, but we did not know if there were any facts, if there was any truth to it. And I don't know if it's ever happened either in college for you or in social circles, if, quote unquote, you had, quote unquote, too much to drink and you got loud somewhere, and not that you would hit somebody, because we didn't even know he hit her at all. He says we were just, shoving each other a little bit, and that was the end of it.
And he used to say stuff like, she hit me.
Yeah, she hit me. I'm the battered man, right. But we have people in our lives that have moments that are innocuous. But because we have right now, and understandably and rightly, our guard up against domestic violence, and every 9 seconds in America, a woman is violated physically by either a boyfriend or a husband, many times ending in murder or serious injury. So it's a very serious issue. But because we have our guard up now, we're looking at any incident as potentially a felony.
Yeah, right.
Now, I'm not a person who argues with my partner, If she said something to me and I said, so I'm usually a guy live and let live guy. But if someone threw a punch at me you know, I would, and it was in the news, there's a domestic incident. Even if I didn't throw a punch back, nor should I throw a punch back, to a certain extent, that's good that people are under scrutiny now. But not every single thing that happens in a person's life is not necessarily reflective of a domestic violent incident.
Right, right.
It just isn't. But I'm glad that we're at the time we are. I'm glad that we're more and more distrusting and skeptical, maybe even cynical. Certainly on my part I am now. I don't think I look at interviewing the same way.
In one of the interviews you did in the last couple of weeks, you said that, yeah, sure, the comments, you know, I read the comments and some of them hurt me.
Horrible. Horrible
But,
stuff.
you know, unfortunately, people pile on now. That's just the way it is.
Once they see, I mean, one of the things that someone said was, I hope you have 2 daughters and they're either murdered or raped. Now, I have 2 sons. Thank God they're healthy kids. But if I had 2 daughters, do you think that maybe that would have been a little bit over the line? Do you think that perhaps that somebody in my family reading something like that would be appalled by that? I was appalled by it. Is it hurtful? Sure, it's hurtful, and it's ridiculous. And more than hurtful, it's hateful. I don't mind criticism saying Roy, you know, looked like he, you know, bought into. But again, I mean, I keep beating this to death. Anybody in the situation I was in 1989 would have been okay with the whole tone of the questioning. I'm just embarrassed that it ended up being, you know, someone who was a murderer, and that I had an opportunity to talk about it, and all I had was two facts. And he denied it, and that's the end of it.
But really, do you feel like you should be embarrassed?
I'm embarrassed by the tone. I'm embarrassed by the tone, not so much the content, but the tone.
You can't have them walk out too, right? Because
Right,
you have an
that's part of
obligation
it.
to the show.
I'll tell you this, you know, if someone asked me on a recent show, what would you do now? I said, just give me a camera. I'll tell you what I would do now. I would ask 15 questions in a row about why you lied to us, why you lied to me, why you lied to your family, why you lied to your children, why you murdered 2 people.
But he lies. He lied to everybody. He lies now. You know, to everybody.
Oh, he's still in denial. He'll deny when he gets out. Yeah. And you know what? A ton of people will still believe him.
Yeah.
You know how many people still believe that he was not guilty in this? Probably at least 25 or 30% still believe he didn't do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't matter how much evidence you have. And listen, the defense won. They did a good job. The prosecution lost.
Right.
There was a lot of other issues. It was about race. It was about celebrity. It was about the LAPD. It was a lot of things that were going on there. But the fact is, they had the evidence, and they still couldn't convict the guy.
I'm going to bring up something that I don't think you have really brought it up in any of the interviews because you're a gentleman. People pile on, and I've been victim of that. And it's hurtful because people don't really know what's really going on. And when somebody says something like, Roy's interviews are primarily dreadful suck-up sessions. Okay, the guy probably didn't ever really watch your shows. You know, maybe once or twice. He wasn't a fan. Okay, fair enough. People can have their opinions, and that's just the way it is. But fellow professionals like Jamel Hill saying that Roy Firestone interview is horribly embarrassing. I mean...
I spoke to her Friday night.
Okay. Fellow professionals ought to know better. And, you know, you say stuff like that...
She called me.
Okay.
That was before she saw the Huffington Post article. And she said, Roy, I'm calling not to apologize because what I said, but I also on a podcast, or so she says, defended you completely after I read the Huffington Post thing. Again, embarrassing in context. In 1989, to ask those questions in that way and in that tone, not knowing what was to come, that's not embarrassing. I was victimized, if you want to use that word or that phrase, by the lack of information at the time of that interview. There was no way I was going to get that information. So you can sit there and judge me any way you want. And I spoke to her personally, that person you just mentioned. She's a professional. She carries herself as a professional. She does a show every single day called Him and Her, I think it is. She knows better than to judge somebody based on...
And to jump on like everybody else. And you know, we're talking about...
She wasn't the only one. I'm sure Dan Lebitard, I'm sure many of these other people did too. I could go down the list. I'm not here to spin anything.
Right.
I'm not here, I have no reason to spin anything. It happened the way it happened, but again, to be judged out of context by the public, 27 years after the fact, without giving the opportunity for me to put any kind of context, not spin, just context. It's not fair, but that's the way the media is working now, and they're going to jump on me for the next week or 2 weeks, or maybe it's over, They'll find somebody else. They'll find some other red meat. I remember somebody ripping into the woman whose child got away from her at the zoo with that gorilla, and they had to kill the gorilla.
Right.
They ripped the mother on social media, destroyed her, as if she was a horrible mother. Well, maybe, is it possible in life that there is a moment when your child breaks away from you and you're distracted and your child runs away? I've seen it in malls. I've seen it everywhere in the world. I've seen it. It's probably happened 1,000 times at a zoo. But people are laying judgment on this woman as being a terrible parent that ended up having a gorilla killed because she was a bad parent. Come on. That's red meat. It's more red meat. People are looking for other people to pile on. And I'm very comfortable with who I am and what I represent in my career. You know, I have, as you see right here, there's 7 Emmy Awards behind me. Somebody thought over the years I did a pretty good job. Does that sound defensive? Maybe, but it is a fact. And I did 5,000 interviews. If they were all suck-ups, I wouldn't have been on the air very long.
Right. No, I mean, as a fellow interviewer, and again, you know, I came up watching your stuff, and I learned how difficult it is because I do extensive research. But you had 24 hours to just come up with it every time.
Right. Less sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do 2 or 3 in a day. And again,
Wow.
oh yeah, we would record multiples in a day. The other thing is that I know where my heart is. I know where my satisfaction is in my career. I know that I did the best I could do. But if people want to lay judgment on me for something that happened 27 years ago without context and call it embarrassing or unprofessional or fawning, it's their right, but it's also my right to say, I don't buy it. You're running hollow to me because you're not understanding what being fair or looking at somebody in context is all about. You're not doing the very same thing that you claim that I didn't do. You're taking one position, one side, and you're running with it.
It's as simple as this. With any of those people, Jamel Hill or any of these people who write these nasty comments, what would they have done if they just got
in 1989.
went back to there? What would they have asked?
Jamel Hill was 12 years old in 1980. I told her that. I said, listen, you wouldn't know, and I'm not saying this to be snarky, but you were 12 years old when that interview was taking place. Okay? And the world was 12 years old in some ways, if you know what I mean, on domestic violence issues. The world was very naive. I remember the phrase vividly. That's someone's personal business. Don't get into that stuff. Or, you know, there's some activity in the house that they argue a lot. Don't talk about that stuff. I remember that. Now it's front page. And maybe that's a good thing. In fact, I know it's a good thing. But it also means that sometimes people are going to be accused of something that never happened at all. Because in the pursuit of trying to find out about domestic violence and are doing diligence in our job. But I defy any of these people who, in the same position in 1989, wouldn't have done the same thing.
I thought it was outrageous, and still do, because it's probably going to go on for you. So,
hope not, but it definitely has cost me already.
Right.
And that's unfair too.
Right.
But I have to deal with it because you have to take the bad with the good. You know, I've had mostly good in my career, in my life, and I'm completely comfortable with what I represented at ESPN for parts of 4 decades.